time again, folks. It is the Hitech Podcast. You are listening to the Hitech Podcast brought to you by Harness Tech. And I am one of the hosts of the Hitech Podcast. My name is Josh Swartz. That's my name.
Wasn't sure if you were going to pick something different or if you weren't sure.
Honestly, I wasn't sure until 5 seconds in. And I went, there was a brief moment where my brain went, maybe I should pretend I'm Will, just for a hot second,
Just say cheers a lot, right?
Yeah, I guess that's what you do. Those of you listening, that is my co-host, the other host of the Hitech Podcast. One might say the nicer host, the wonderful host, one and only Will Illingworth.
But
Anyway, it's time for the Hitech Podcast. Yeah, I know. Tuesdays, not that exciting, right? You're not over Wednesday yet. You're not into Friday, but it is the day that the Hitech Podcast releases. So
it's Wednesday Eve. Tomorrow's Wednesday, which means tomorrow's.
I've always referred to Tuesday as Wednesday Eve. That's been a thing I've been doing for a long time. That's for sure. Okay, another week before we jump into the hijinks and craziness. Just a couple notes for you new listeners or recurring listeners who have yet to listen to us yet. When we say all of these things. That didn't make a lot of sense, but it
did.
Fine. It meant you've been listening for a while, but you haven't done what we've been telling you to do in the beginning. If you're listening to the Hitech Podcast, make sure you check us out on all social media, on all those socials. You can find us either at Hitech Podcast or at Hitech Pod. Please go subscribe, follow. What's the third one? There's a third word we use. Like, subscribe, and follow. All of our areas. If you listen to us on YouTube, go do all of those things there. If you listen to us on a different platform, go
click
do all
the
bell,
subscribe,
the bell, do all of the I don't know.
Screen.
Whatever you do, please do that. That would be great. It just helps us out, knowing we actually have people listening to us, and it helps you out, getting quick notifications about new episodes or other new content. We're not only releasing episode stuff now, we have been releasing some other fun tidbits of things on the Hitech Podcast, and we plan to do a little bit more of that as the year to come. So make sure you follow us on one of those areas. Also, you can email us, inbox@hitechpod.us. If you want to be on the podcast, you have a thought to share, you disagreed with something Will said, not what I said, because, I don't want to hear it. But if you disagreed with something Will said, you can let him know at inbox. No, I'm just joking. You can let us know at inbox. HitechPod.us. You want to share a fun note? Anything, let us know. You can hit us up there. We still use email. Also a reminder, we have a website, HitechPod.us. There's an episode page for every episode that you listen to. Please go check it out. If we share a link or a resource or something you're interested in, make sure to go to that episode page because it will give you more information on how to get there. Especially if we have guests on the podcast. There's a lot more information on the episode pages when we have guests. Because we share all of their information, links how to connect with them. So if you really like something someone said on our podcast, you can make sure to check out their information there. I don't know why I gave a lot of guest information because there's no guest on this episode, but for other episodes,
coming episodes and previous episodes,
you could do that. So
I'm gonna throw one wrench in your thing here. So this episode, we're gonna let Josh introduce it in just a second, but it is going to feature content from our business website, which is harnesstech.us. That's not in our usual reel, but if you see things during this episode that you'd like to go check out yourselves, head over to harnesstech.us, or if you're interested in our services.
We'll be showing some stuff. I will say this episode specifically, if you're listening to only audio, there will be still, Will and I are trying to be very intentional about making sure that the podcast does not become too heavy visual video stuff. So those of you listening on normal podcast platforms without video, get a lot out, but I will say we are going to be showing a handful of stuff in this episode. So I would highly encourage if you're listening to this to go back and check out the video version on YouTube or Spotify, and make sure you check that out because there's going to be some cool visual stuff that Will and I are going to be showing in this episode, or some work we've done that we want to talk about. So with that said, let me give a little. Let me set the stage, if you will, almost like a scrolling pre-Star Wars text, because gonna be a little bit space themed today. No, Will and I, one of the things we wanted to do on the podcast for a little while that we haven't been doing, but have been itching to do as we released the new version of the podcast and kind of broadened our scope a little bit, is talk a little bit more about what we've done learning and development wise outside of just the podcast or even our day-to-day regular jobs. We've gotten some chances to do some cool stuff, and Will and I have been playing around with some stuff on our own, how to do some course development, do learning and development, interactive training, things like that. Will and I have had some experience doing that professionally and also just for fun. They've been doing some stuff and are working on a really cool project right now that we'll probably talk about later. It's not the one we're going to talk about today, but it might pop up again on the podcast.
Can't wait for it to.
It's going to be great. We're working on it. We'll get there. But we've done some cool projects. And so we wanted to share kind of what we've done, how we did it, and why we did some of what we did, and kind of just debrief from some of it. We think a lot of doing kind of retrospectives on stuff that you have done is really helpful. And when you have a podcast, you can just do it for everyone to listen to. So enjoy that, if you will. It's kind of the goal for today. So
it's our podcast. Sit there, listen.
Yeah, you just listen. You don't have to. I mean, you can turn the episode off, but that would be ridiculous.
Goodbye.
So what do we want to share? Will and I had done some work last year. There's been a bigger project we've been working on for quite a while, and we can't share that because it's for
NDAs.
somebody. And NDAs, all that fun stuff.
That is what it is.
But out of that, because we wanted to show some of what we had done for Harness Tech, we ended up last year deciding to create some demo work that is not perfect by any means, but can get across the idea of some of the stuff that is possible. And with even more time, could create some more polished versions of it, right? What came out of that was actually a lot more fun than we anticipated. We weren't really looking forward to creating demo work, I don't think, because it was work that we weren't getting paid for.
Who wants to build a portfolio without having built it for other things?
Yeah, it's not.
You gotta have
exciting.
one.
So, we out of this, we did some work, but it actually ended up becoming a lot more fun than we originally intended. Specifically, I think the gamified version that we ended up doing. So, a little bit of background: we were trying to figure out what to do. As any good person trying to make up fake learning experiences, we were like, let's create something off of maybe some basic thing. Like we wanted to show how to scaffold out stuff. We wanted to show how to give some information, right? And how to practice, how digital practice can be done. And so originally the idea was like, what if we create a e-learning on how to make a cocktail? I believe was the original idea.
Josh and I enjoy cocktails. It's a
good time.
It's a nice thing. And
a lot of ingredients.
It's nice to learn a few new ones, right? So the idea was, let's put it together. But then it was like, would that serve the potential audiences we would want?
We were trying to create gamified stuff. And so in our mind, that meant that it might entail to a younger audience in some ways. But that's not always true. I will push that's not always true. But in this case, what we were trying to create, original envisionment was that I would need to be able to do that. So we weren't able to do that. So what we ended up doing was like, well, what if we tweak that? We make it a course about how to make a smoothie, right? Like just a basic, like here are some ingredients, here's how you pull them together, here's how you make a smoothie, right? And so we did some basic, there wasn't a lot of like real intense like learner analysis and structural design stuff being done on this project. It was a demo. We needed to do it quickly, right? So we didn't do some of that
show
stuff.
off. Frankly,
normally.
We know how to do all that stuff, but we needed to show our skills off. Like, can we make it fun? Can we make it interactive? Can we put some visuals, some sounds? We knew we just needed to get that part done.
So we wanted to create the smoothie. Well, this evolved over time. I will take blame for this because we both assigned out the different work that we were going to be doing, and I took the smoothie one, at least brainstorming and storyboarding what it was going to be, and it evolved from a smoothie training to being put in space, to being in a space station, to being a pirate had taken over the space station who loved smoothies, and you had to make smoothies for this pirate. And so it ended up being what has now been lovingly called the Smoothie Overlord training, which was basically teaching somebody how to do a smoothie, but with this interactive game idea of you're controlling a character, you're coming into this space station. You have this smoothie pirate overlord who's come in. He loves smoothies. You have to find the perfect recipe and get it made and give it to him, right? So there's the idea. Now, there's a lot more that could have been done in this module, but we needed to create it quickly. It needed to move pretty quickly.
What do we do? Right? Like 2 weeks?
Yes. So
development.
We wanted to create both our demos in a 6-week cycle. And so for those of you who don't know, we love 37 Signals. We mentioned it a couple times on the podcast. And so out of that, I've done a lot of study and done a lot of professional work, taking the book Shape Up that they've done and reworking it into for a learning development e-learning team in higher ed. And so Will and I kind of just adopted that cycle system for Harness Tech. And so we operate on that. We produce the podcast on production cycles. We use that when we work with clients. We do all of that stuff. We use that production cycle system. And it looks different depending on different projects we're doing. But we had set in stone, we need to make 2 demos. We need to do it in 6 weeks total. So we did. And I want to highlight a few things, okay? The point of this episode is to show you what we did, how we did it, and then talk a little bit about why we did what we did and what we think implications for e-learning and stuff are and some takeaways from it. But I want to back away for a second, just like a teacher explaining the teaching that they've done. We just have done a pretty intense series on productivity and practices and things like that. There are some intentional practices that Will and I did from a project management style on this project. We set ahead of time that we were going to only work on this project for 6 weeks. That was all the time we were willing to commit to this project. Yep. And that drove a lot of how we did, what we focused our time on, and why we did certain things, right? And the reason I want to highlight this is because this is some of the stuff Will and I have been talking about. I think too often people, when we're tackling projects, we dream up all the things we want to do, and then we set these hypothetical timelines for how we're going to do all of them, and then we end up not getting there. What Will and I have been trying to practice, and I think has really been helpful for us, is to sit back and go, no, how much time are we willing to commit to this? Like, how much time can we commit to this? Okay, what is doable within that time? And that shaped our scope. Time is the resource we can't flex as much as we think it is. So let's use that resource to dictate what we're going to do. And I think that's what we did on this project. So the result of that was the Smoothie Overlord training. That was actually kind of pretty cool. So before we jump into how we did what we did, I think Will's going to share a screen here from our website and show you a little bit of what we did. We'll try to give some narration to some of this for those listening in audio, but and we're going to try to share audio. It doesn't work every time on our platform right now, so we're going to see if it actually does.
We shall see. Folks, very first and foremost, here is harnesstech.us. And like any person inviting you to the home, I'd just like to take you on a brief tour and route to our location. So, it's just scrolling. So once you get to our work area, you can kind of poke through a few different options here, but I'm going to jump into the Smoothie Overlord. Now that's going to launch us a new tab. Awesome. And we're going to see this first step of satisfying the Pirate Smoothie Overlord. Let's cross our fingers and hope the audio plays.
I got it.
Here we go.
Where is my smoothie?
Everything you see on screen, and maybe even here, no, not here. Everything you see on screen practically is AI generated. Josh,
here is also AI generated.
What?
Pretty much. The background music is not AI generated. We found this off of
we got that separately, right? We bought that.
We did buy that. But the voice of the pirate you heard of "Where Is My Smoothie" that is AI generated. Yeah,
right.
Voiceover.
So this is just the first start and introduction to our Smoothie Overlord and everything going on.
I am so glad you are here. I just got word that space pirates have invaded our space station. They are led by a notorious warlord who has an obsession with interstellar smoothie recipes and is known to cause chaos wherever he goes. The only way to save our space station from this overlord's chaos is to fulfill his peculiar obsession. I have intel that says the perfect ingredients and recipe for the best interstellar smoothie in the universe is in the station. So it's clear we need to scour the station for ingredients to make him the perfect interstellar smoothie.
I will note, please don't question me on the dialogue we created. We did create this very quickly in 2 weeks.
Didn't you use AI to help with the?
I did use AI. Yeah, AI generated all of the dialogue. And a few notes, right? If Will and I were actually doing this as a really learning, I probably wouldn't have generated all the dialogue with AI. I would have generated all of the audio with AI for this 100%. But the actual writing of the dialogue and stuff, Will and I didn't do a lot of intense figuring out the exact writing style and what we were going to do. We generated that with AI. But I will note, some of this I would probably still generate with AI, like filler content, filler dialogue.
Yeah.
AI did a pretty good job at generating a lot of that, right? And so what you were hearing or you're seeing on the screen, that background is entirely AI generated. The doors, the character, The audio for the character is all AI generated. We used a couple different tools for that. We'll talk about. We use Midjourney which is not a surprise to a lot of people. We use Midjourney for the image generation, but not just Midjourney. I combined that with a handful of things. Right, I use Midjourney to generate it. I use some tools to turn it into vector images if I needed to do some editing. I used Canva to do some pretty serious editing to these images. So there was kind of a process for it, right? And then obviously Storyline is used to create this. This is a Storyline e-learning project.
Yep.
But and so we created that. And the point of this thing is not to go through every little detail of what we did. You can check it out in a hard second if you're curious. We did some custom navigation built into this, progress bar to help show people progress, stuff like that. But we were able to create pretty quickly a kind of low stakes gamified experience through this, right? So on the screen right now, Will's got up the main door that they can click into. So Will clicks enter right now. It'll take him into a separate room. So you can do that.
And our second character is introduced, our little robots guy.
Yes. He is one of my favorites. I got to be honest. If you go listen to it on the website, AI did a great job with his voice. And for a real quick note, we used the tool called 11 Labs to do this, and we used the free plan to do all of this on 11 Labs. So this was super cool. 11 Labs did a fantastic job with this. I was able to edit audio pretty easily and tweak it, and find what I was really kind of hoping was a C-3PO style voice for our robot, and we got that figured out. But we generated again. All of this was generated again with AI. The entire lobby, the doors, all of that stuff is created with AI. Now I did a little bit of magic to tweak some stuff, right? So like the doors you're seeing are separate assets. They were generated separately from AI. I used Canva's magic editor that they have in there to erase some things on the background and then just put the doors over top of it to create the doors, and create that environment. But we were able to create this pretty quickly with AI in the process that we did.
One of the things that became really significant for Josh and I in learning to do this was then as well working in tandem, right? I did a lot of like the interactions and interactivities while Josh was building the world and the narrative. And I think that is already demonstrating our skills. Josh does a lot better with like the visual design, user interface, etc. I'm just like, I just develop. Let me get into the variables, the triggers, the fun stuff like that. But like what you see on screen at the moment, folks, including our character and the room and navigation and stuff, while Josh was building the visuals, then he hands it over to me and I come back in and build in like this click activity. You know, okay, that's simple, but it's going to move us along to the next step and keep things going. When we have folks go into this game now, Josh built again what we're seeing as the instructions and the person, the voiceover, while I came in behind him and built the crossword puzzle itself. We worked through that process. For us was, I think, significant to learn like how to share a storyline project, how to share our responsibilities, how to lift each other up, right? Like as Josh did good things, I was like, all right, that's awesome. Love this, love more of that. As I messed stuff up, he's like, hey dude, you know that the crossword puzzle is broken. We figured these things out together, but like on screen, this one, I don't even remember what each of these is, so I'm not going to try and talk and do them at the moment, but like we have to complete this as an activity in the overall design. We have to complete this crossword puzzle to learn the ingredients for the smoothie. So the crossword puzzle is insignificant, but the activity brings the learner into the narrative. And that's just one place here where we bring together both Josh's skills and background with all the AI tools, and then what I was doing to kind of make sure we could keep this learner interacting and doing things as they're going through the process. I love doing it, right? Like Josh and I said, we kind of jumped into this as like, oh, we're just going to build a smoothie thing. And then it became this narrative, this fun practice. I'm hoping if we don't do too much more on screen and kind of go over it with you, I am going to skip ahead and eventually show you the pirate conclusion, because it's like one of my favorite little, highlights in this.
It was your masterpiece, really. That was the idea. But like, so stop sharing your screen real quick, and I'll talk a little bit about, give you some time to get to that spot in the training. And I'll talk a little bit about it. How did we actually collaborate and do this? Like, so the idea behind this episode, again, it's kind of just debrief behind what we did so we can kind of share how we did things and what we did, and lessons learned from it, right? And so Will and I learned a lot from the earlier projects we did last year on Storyline working together. And I think something that's really that we loved about this, and I wish I could do more with other people as I've been developing, is we didn't, in my past experience in developing and designing, right? Often we, like, one person would do a course, another person would do another course, right? And like you would do the whole course yourself, right? And right now in my day job, like that's some of the experience I've come across right now. What I love about what Will and I did is we found our strengths in what we were doing, right? Instead of you develop this course, I'll develop this course, right? We decided what strengths do we have that can bring the most consistency. Now, we took this practice and did this across tons of courses for an actual project. But for this project, we did it on 2 different courses. The one being the Smoothie Overlord we just showed you, right? And we decided what are our biggest strengths, right? While I can do triggers and background stuff and have learned especially a lot about that over the time, that Will loves doing that and is better at thinking through those dynamics than I am. I like messing with the visuals. I like coming up with the bigger theme and the design side of it and doing the AI stuff that we were doing. I had learned most of that on our last project, so my strength was in that area. Will would have had to play some catch up in some of the Midjourney stuff we were doing because he just hadn't used it. Now, Will better at using Adobe stuff now at this point for AI generation than I am because he's used it, but at that time, those were our strengths. So what we did is we found those, leaned on those, and then collaborated on the same course. Now, I don't see a lot of that happening. If you're doing that in your space, let us know, because we have not seen a lot of that in our e-learning development. It's usually one ID working on a course, another ID working on another course. And so the way we did this is a couple different things. We obviously leveraged Notion pretty heavily to do this. So I'm going to share my screen here. Do this. That's our project management software.
Yes, Notion.
It doesn't have to be done in Notion, though it's cooler if it is. The way we did this here, I'm gonna go ahead and share this tab here. So this is the project page we created. So the reason I want to show this is because this is a practical playing out of some of the stuff we talked about in our last productivity series. Will and I created this project. We have a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of other stuff in here that's not in some of the stuff we've showed in the other area because it's stuff for us. But what we did down here is we laid out our tasks in the project in Notion. I have it set up in a timeline, but those who like tables better can look at tables. We had statuses. We had everybody assigned to things. And then we worked in shorter kind of sprints in our cycles. So our cycles are 6 weeks, but we worked in 2-week blocks and just kind of worked on things, right? So Will and I both took kind of ownership of drafting out the storyboards for different courses. I did it for the Smoothie Overlord. We reviewed, gave some feedback. We kept meeting regularly to talk through that feedback. And then we went piece by piece on the course. Now, I want to emphasize this. This is us prioritizing here and trying to practice some of what we've been preaching on the podcast, which is we could have done this a different way, and I think wouldn't have worked as well. We could have said, Will, you draft out the storyboard for the compliance password module that we worked on. I'll do the gamified space station. We'll keep reviewing, and then we'll both individually work on each course, and we'll come back together and review. I mean, Will, that's one way we could have went about doing that. And we talked about doing it. We actually, for a brief second, thought about doing it that way.
Yeah,
we realized very quickly then both of us would have to do everything on the module. We didn't like doing that. So we ended up changing our minds and focused on the course that we thought was the highest priority first. And so the gamified one was that for us because we knew it was going to be harder. I think this is, again, reasons in how you prioritize. We didn't just say what was most important. We said, what's going to be the hardest thing to do in this project? And we knew it was going to be the gamified one because that was going to require a lot more work. We were going to be building games, and the password compliance demo we were going to do, that was a lot simpler. It was mainly some information. While we would love to make it more complicated, we weren't going to for the demos. So we prioritized the gamified space station first. And this is what I love about Notion. I could set up a whole page what our timeline is going to be, but then inside the actual page, we laid out to-dos. And so for those listening on audio, there's just a page. We laid out different areas. We assigned those to each other. And then when we ended up...
boxes.
Lots of check boxes.
Boxes everywhere.
A lot of check-in meetings to review things. And then what we did in Notion is created a system for storing the files, versioning titles to them. Whenever somebody was done with a file, we'd upload it so that the next person could jump in and do things. And we coordinated together on who was going to be doing what when. And Will had a good system for importing stuff too if we had to overlap it all on stuff, and then we did some QA work on it. Right. So for the sake of not spending the entire time sharing the screen, I'll stop sharing there. But that was what we did in Notion. The key again is communication. We planned out ahead of time what we're going to be doing. We prioritized what we're going to be doing, and we laid out all those tasks on the project and made it clear who was going to own what when. And things changed. Stuff didn't go the way we thought it was going to. Something took longer than we intended. Will and I on different occasions broke things. Like things didn't go the way. And all we did is we looked at our plan and we adapted. And I want to highlight that because, again, in this like technology heavy productivity world, I think too often we glorify just constantly doing, and we don't talk about planning. And so we planned a bunch of that. So that was some of the project stuff. Some of the ways we did then the work we did, like we said, we used Midjourney. I'm not going to get into everything we did with Midjourney because that would take an entirely different episode. And we've talked about Midjourney before, but we used that to generate all the assets that we were doing. But again, careful design planning. We didn't just jump right into storyline. We storyboarded both of our content, and we actually used Miro to do this. This is probably the last thing I'm going to present. We went ahead and used Miro to do this. I know a lot of people use PowerPoint storyboard and do a lot of that. We wanted to use Miro because we've had it, and there's a couple reasons I also like Miro. Miro has some default, what I would call like UX wireframing tools. So you can create like buttons and stuff in here, like basic things. But I want to emphasize something that I think, Will, you and I really loved about how we did this storyboarding that we haven't done before in other storyboards. What we decided to do is, instead of going overly detailed, first of all, we were very basic. I might have put the dialogue in. I put like some basic shapes on some ideas. I had my main character generated, though I will note the character in the storyboard is different. Yeah. This is how Agile works. I had this character as a different character, this guy in the orange spacesuit. When I started generating more assets for the project in Midjourney, it was harder to get stuff. I think it was because I generated the pirate, which Will's going to show here in a second. Yep. I generated the pirate, and he looked so cool, but he didn't look anything like in the same universe as this character. Yeah. So we changed what we were doing. But that's not the point. The storyboard was to show like loosely what we were going to do. So I want to highlight that because I know I think, Will, you would agree. There's a tendency in our field in learning and development and storyboard to go way too detailed. Would you agree that that's the case?
Absolutely. And my personal experience with them is I'm an under detailed guy. So Josh helps me get enough detail in there to be helpful, because when you compare our two, we're not going to go into the password manager in this episode, but when you compare the storyboard I did for that versus what Josh did for this was more useful in the long term for a team. Mine was something that was like keeping my notes straight for what the motions would be or like the general sequences would be. But Josh couldn't walk into my storyboard and work on the project, right? That actually was a challenge, and I improved my process and my detail so that he could. But like Josh's is just detailed enough that if I had a question while I was working on the project, I went to the storyboard and there was an answer for me, right? Like it's not zoomed in at the moment on this, but like the stuff that's below the visual on screen. So we're seeing, folks who are listening, we're seeing half and half where there's like a diagram of what the page should look like, the characters. And then right below it is what's the slide goal, right? What are we doing with this slide? Are there any animation notes? So that's something Josh and I will have to come back in once everything that's flat on the screen animate something to move or change or shift. What setup notes are needed, right? Is there something we need to adjust with the menu or the settings or the features and then background imagery, general notes, like is something need to be generated, created? Sometimes these notes also included like, hey, make sure you use the variable that tracks blah, 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 right? But when we could step into this, we didn't have to put the entire script. We didn't have to put 10 extra slides of information. Every slide you see in our storyboard became a real slide in the end product. But each slide you see, while Josh, I think the only thing Josh did, quote unquote, that was over detailed, but I don't think it is. It's like you put the dialogue on every slide. Yeah. I think it's fine, right? But if not for that dialogue, there's 4 lines of text with every slide. And I've seen these things that are literally a storyline with every single slide. And there's nothing against that, but like for efficiency, for time's sake, for getting this done in a 6-week cycle, this met the brief. If I had a question, I came here, I checked first. If I didn't understand something, I might have to reach out to Josh. But like most of the times, you know, I could just move from the storyboard and pick up where we were in the process for development.
Yeah. And I will note, like, again, iteration is the point. My storyboard didn't originally have the dialogue in it. It was mainly just the character and the notes that Will showed below. When I started doing the dialogue, I put it in the storyboard instead of straight into storyline because I wanted it somewhere else outside of storyline for access and editing.
Right.
So that I didn't have to, it wasn't only accessible in storyline. And I think, again, we're getting into a very focused conversation that for learning and development, but I think this is important when you're developing course content, when you're doing instructional design and you're developing some kind of digital learning experience, having a lower fidelity space to loosely map out what you're going to do allows you to brainstorm in a way without getting too stuck in an idea. And then you iterate on that, right? And so we were able to do that here. I think the most important thing at a storyboard level for us, and I keep trying to do it at a storyboard level now, is what's my goal in the slide, like Will said? Is there any specific animation stuff we're going to want to do? Is there anything specific about setup? And for those generating images, is there anything specific about the image background or imagery that I need to know, right? And so we did some of this stuff. And then we built out some more details in certain slides that I needed more details. Like I realized as I was building out a crossword slide, I couldn't be loose on that. I had to be pretty clear about what that was going to be because Will was going to be building that out later and he needed to know what to do out of my brain. So like that needed to be more detailed. Like I allowed myself to be flexible about where detail was going to be. If I needed detail somewhere specifically for whatever reason, I did that in the storyboard and I built that out. And so that was the key in here. Now I want to highlight one other thing again. I keep emphasizing this prioritizing thing, but here's something that Will and I did. If you're going to work in a team, or even if you're thinking of yourself when you're working on stuff, this is how usually a developer, instructional designer goes about things, at least in my experience, which is I build out the storyboard from slide 1 to the end. I'm just going to go in order and I'm going to build it out, right? Like that's generally, I think, Will, is that safe to say, generally how most people end up tackling it, give or take?
I would say it's how they want to.
Yeah. Well, where they have content, right?
Right.
Yeah. If you're doing content, you build out the content you've got. But I want to highlight something. Will and I looked at this and we said, what are going to be the hardest things to do? And we used the little icon to do that. We picked chamber 3 because it was this whole delicious meter that we decided to come up with, which was our own fault. So we thought that was going to be a little bit harder. It was going to be a game activity. The pop-out menus that we were building at the time, we hadn't really done yet. So we weren't sure it was a new thing for us. We weren't sure how that was going to go. We knew it was possible, but it was going to be a lot of work. And the final boss area we just labeled because I think we had this idea of like floating cups and stuff. And like we weren't sure what you're going to be doing. And so we labeled those as more difficult. That was the first things Will focused on, where that was that stuff. He went and started developing that immediately while I was working on asset generation because he was trying to get the basics set up of what we were doing. And so I think that was one of the key pieces, right? So again, I don't want to go into all the details because we're not just a podcast for learning and development, talk about how we did things in storyline, but this is what we did. This is how we storyboard stuff out. From there, then we started building in storyline. We started building in whatever we were going to do, right? And I think where this is a generally applicable principle for anybody is you might not be building courses in storyline, but maybe you're an instructional designer, you're working with a faculty member to make something in Canvas, or you're working on putting stuff. So often I see people, and my teams, even my past team, there were people who wanted to do this, which was I want to take what we're doing and just start building it directly in the LMS. And I do want to get stuff into what it's going to look like quick because I want to see what that's going to look like. But I think there is importance to taking the step to step back and just map out storyboard, blueprint, whatever you're going to call it, in a space that isn't the actual final place. So you use some flexibility to kind of mess with things. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And the difference between Miro and Storyline as a for instance, right? Storyline has sliding and has a whole place where you see the story view. But Storyline, once you start to build in it, moves much slower than Miro does, right? Like I was working on a Storyline project today that I would say has roughly 4 dozen videos in it. And by the time I got the 4 dozen videos in it, it took a long time to very slowly save and load and move. Like it's not an efficient tool for working with the big picture. Once it's all in there, you can move around and go slide to slide. That's it. Storyline's great. But like when we needed to see the entire picture of the Smoothie Overlord, we needed Miro. We needed a spot where we could zoom in, zoom out, see everything at one spot, move slide to slide, switch around, whatever. Because there's also parts of that moved, like we changed things, we pushed things around, and it was easier to switch them on the board before we ever got to development. Because the other side of it is, once you get to Storyline, every button, every box, every text box has settings. And if you make something like kind of as an idea somewhere, but then you don't capture those settings somewhere else, it really lags you on time. Like fixing continuity or consistency issues later is wretched. If Josh made the overall visual design and the storyboard as good as he wanted it, and then we stepped into Storyline and made kind of a consistent, I'd say, item package to use, right? Our buttons looked one way, our shapes were certain things, our colors were. If we set that up at the beginning before we even started to build the rest of the thing, we saved ourselves so much time by not having to change states and change shades and change variables and things like that. As soon as I sat down with a project, like we identified some of those big red items for me, I just started writing variables. Like I was thinking through how the math was going to work, how the changes, how it would check the knowledge, how the user would interact with it. So I just wrote variables and I had to get them all in place so I knew what was going to be. That takes a lot of work. And you don't have to do that in Miro. There's just Miro, get it on the board. And it's not just Miro, but like your storyboard, your blueprint, whatever it is, lets you get the entire thing in place without having to fight with all of the features and settings that are typical of either your LMS or your e-learning authoring tool. It's critical. I think it's really important. And it's time saver. Like we're all about. We were trying to do this in 6 weeks. There was no moment where Josh and I wanted to waste time. And wasting time is fixing buttons in 3 sections because you made them at different times or something like that, right? Like that is one of those time drains in Storyline where you're tracking down buttons that have a different state because you didn't think about it when you made it in the first place.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's some of what we did behind the scenes. I think before we jump into some of our thoughts, implications for learning and development, Will wants to show the final pirate moment that happens in the module.
So, folks, I have this queued up just before we solve the problem. We've gotten to stage 3. This is chamber 3. I have mixed the perfect smoothie. You see it's ready here. I'm going to hit mix. And it is running some sound effects in the background that I have muted for your sake. I'm going to unmute in just 1 second. But we land here with the Overlord. And this is that Overlord that Josh told you, like he made this guy look so cool. We wanted to put the theme around him. Frankly, he drove a lot of the narrative. Let me turn our sound on and satisfy the Overlord's thirst.
What? This is the best smoothie I have ever had.
Now, that little
At
bit
long last,
there
we've got what we came for, crew.
may not have done too much for you. Folks, if you weren't watching, the Smoothie Overlord came on screen and he animated and he moved and he screamed and loud. And ironically, that slide probably took me 2 hours to make because the level of animation that I wanted to put into it and to give the motion and the emotion from the character just took a lot of effort, took a lot of time to program all the little things. But kind of the point around it is, while it took 2 hours, another point to be said here is it only took 2 hours. If you look at some of our peers on LinkedIn and some of places like that, and peers, I'm saying peers, how arrogant of me to assume we are
we're not their peers. Will and I follow some people who are doing stuff that are way cooler than this in storyline.
When we look up to our heroes, our heroes are using JavaScript and AI and like direct integrations with ChatGPT and stuff and like Midjourney. They're building magical worlds. That does take knowledge. It takes a lot of effort. It takes time. Josh and I have yet to sink into this and to learn. And it's really daunting. It looks so cool. But you're like, oh, can I do that? Yes. I want to say, yes, you can. Have we done it yet? No, we can't. We haven't. But what we can do is take pictures, take flat imagery, take storyline, take a good narrative and make it interesting. And that was just one small example where I felt like that page, yeah, it took me time, but it was all features that were already available to me. If you can make a button fly in across the screen, you could make that screen that I just showed where he gets animated, gets angry, things show on screen. What? You know, it was all possible with stock features. I didn't use any JavaScript with that. I didn't use any special stuff. Like Josh built it in AI and then we put it together.
I think the point is that and Will selling himself short. I mean, he's done some JavaScript stuff. The other module we built did have an AI, had a JavaScript element built into it that allowed for password searching and stuff. So it's not like we can't do that stuff. I think the point is we wanted to embark on creating something that didn't leverage all of that stuff and just leverage some gamified things, right? And the point is creating more than just here's a lot of text, go do this knowledge check, here's a lot of text, here's this knowledge check, maybe a video, right, based online learning is a lot easier to do now as AI is becoming more accessible. It didn't take a lot of training to figure out how to create some images with Midjourney. 11 Labs was super easy to use for creating audio. And just with those two tools, we were able to create an entire environment. Now, is it something like mind-blowingly amazing? No, we made it in 2 weeks. We didn't put a ton of like crazy effort into designing out all the elements of it, right? And we're just teaching people how to make this dumb smoothie we decided to create in the game, right? But it proves some points. With some intentionality behind storytelling and some difference of some game stuff and using a little bit of AI to get some creative voices and thematic imagery and things, you can create an environment, a story that helps people learn that I think is a lot more engaging than just a lot of text. And basically what I think Storyline's used in a lot of places, which is just an enhanced version of PowerPoint. I mean, like that's really what we see. And when it comes to developing courses and things like that online, I think we can create more engaging experiences with those things. And I think the key is just to do a little bit of storytelling, to put some intentionality into that, right? About how you're going to do it. I think too often I see like we're training, like let's just go to corporate learning and development here for a second, or even higher ed, which has had to do this. Training students or a learner on how to do a certain task or use a software or whatever it may be. How many of those usually end up being like some kind of walkthrough video on how to click through it? And then maybe it's like a demo afterwards where they click through it themselves. And that's not bad, but like, what if instead you created an actual story that they walk through that environment and that story, and they're still doing all of those things, but there's some purpose anchored in an experience for it that also ties to reality, right? Like that might be the case as well. I don't know. I've been going on for a while, so we'll.
No. Yeah, I agree with you. Like one of these things that I've experienced, I build a lot of compliance material in my day job, and compliance material is pretty dry. Unfortunately, even with my desires and experiences, there's subject matter experts who still demand things be a certain way, right? And at the end of the day, I could be the developer, but I'm not the owner. I'm not the authority, right? So we still create things that aren't as interesting, but I've seen products. I'm comfortable saying it. Yeah, there's a company out there called Ninjio, or maybe the product line is called Ninjio, but it's a compliance focused security platform that has built an entire e-learning world around anime. All of the compliance things that you do are anime style, and the interactions are more anime focused and whatever. And it's a cool niche. they have as well gotten artists and a theme and an idea around this, that like all that they do is build this stuff. And that it's more interesting. Their model is to do like 2 or 3 small things every month, as opposed to doing one security training for 4 hours once a year. But you get these little clips and you kind of get through more of a narrative approach to learning that it works. They've been doing it for, when I was talking with them, it was like 3 or 4 years. They had 200 episodes, or something like of these things. And they had the value. But one of the pushbacks to this kind of approach, of course, is always kind of the, people want the button up suit and tie approach to corporate learning. And it's like, it's just, yes, it's cleaner, it's sleek, but it's not fun. It's not engaging, it's not interesting. And we can do something like this in 6 weeks. A company like Ninja is doing it day in, day out. I think it's one of those moments like we can have both the encouragement to know it's not that hard to do, and we can dream a little bigger. We can dream about pirates and smoothies, or we can do anime, or we can make just maybe some of the learning checks are crossword puzzles instead of multiple choice, right? Like there are options, and we should be able to think through those things.
Yeah, and I think it's intentionality too about just not doing games, right? Like I've seen people who just throw in a crossword, and we've felt this way in some of the work we've done, where it's like, let's just throw in this crossword because it's gamified. But the rest of the experience was not. There was no story designed behind what got to them. And I think that's the thing we tried to, we had fun doing with this project was, we used a crossword because practically we had done that somewhere else. We were just copying the framework here. But we tied that into like a computer connection that they were going to, and it was loose. We could have done that much better in that project. Like that's because we were moving very quickly. The meter thing came from another thing that we had done that was not a deliciousness meter, but we had like tweaked that vibe and how we were going to do it, right? We used some escape room stuff that Will didn't show here in this project, but we designed it into the story, and it had a purpose behind it too. It was not just what it was doing. So I think it's finding that purpose, finding a good story to build into what you're doing, and then using the tools that are available to you to build that, right, in an interactive way. And I'm not saying obviously in some places we're not going to be able to all do that, right? And I'm right there with you. The stuff I've made just recently, it's not all in that space, but we can dream and maybe help people come along on that dream a little bit, maybe push ourselves to be creative, a little bit more creative. And I think the biggest thing for me is focusing on the story we're telling in the learning, not just the information we're giving and checking off boxes. Like focusing on how are we creating something that can engage someone? Because too often I think we hear people say people just can't focus anymore on like a 4-hour training. And it's like, I agree, we should be building out scaffolding, I am a fan of micro learning. I would also argue that people sit there and watch incredibly long movies and have zero problems with it. And like, I'm not saying like every training needs to be the epic Lord of the Rings.
But it would be great.
There's tactics that people use to engage, and I think if you connect it back to what they're really doing and there's a story connected to what they really need to do with that information, most people would be engaged enough in that in some way, right? So anyway, those are some of our thoughts, our musings. Go over to harnesstech.us to check out the Smoothie Overlord, to play some of the stuff. And feel free to hit us up if you're curious about how we did some of the things that we did in there, because they were a lot of fun.
Yeah. If you got feedback, thoughts, ideas, want to know hows, if we can help you with that kind of stuff, you can slide into the inbox for the podcast, or it's the same inbox for Harness Tech, inbox@harnesstech.us. So pretty easy to get a hold of us. All right, folks, this has been episode 162. Next episode is 163. Spoiler alert. We recorded that tonight as well. It's very exciting. I'm thrilled. And it was so good, it's going to become 2 episodes, but that's more on that later. We bring on and introduce to you all Chris Crosdale, our social media manager for episode 163. It was a really fun conversation. We love Chris. I hope you enjoy it. It's actually going to be more useful than I expected for like other social media managers, right? Like I thought it was just going to be us talking to Chris.
Yeah.
You know,
we didn't think our episode was going to be useful at all, really, is what we're saying. Turns out to be useful. Who would have thought?
I'll just take my foot and put it back in my mouth real quick.
But Chris, when you hear this, just remember that Will said that. So when you're deciding who should be prominently
who gets
in
clipped
our
this week,
just clip Josh.
Just
just remember that.
But yeah, so that's what's coming up next. As always, a reminder, find us on the socials at Hitech Podcast or at Hitech Pod. Email us, inbox at hitechpod.us, or our website, hitechpod.us. Every single episode has an episode page with a little bit more information. Please be sure to go check those out and share them with friends. That's it, folks. Thank you for another week. We're empowering minds.
Embracing tech.
Cheers.
Cheers.